Some mornings, the body wakes not with urgency, but with memory, a quiet ache behind the knees, a slight refusal from the stomach, a hand reaching for tea, not for caffeine, but for comfort. There is no alarm anymore, only the soft tap of time, only the rituals we've repeated long enough to become prayers. In Japan, there is a word, modenai. It means, don't waste what still holds life. And sometimes, what we've wasted quietly is our own rhythm, our own knowing, the body's wisdom that has never shouted, but always whispered. The elders there did not count calories, they counted steps. They noticed hunger not by the clock, but by the breath. They didn't seek longevity, they simply lived in ways that made life linger. And maybe, after 60, we don't need new methods. We just need to remember what soft science already proved, and what gentler cultures never forgot. 1. The ritual of empty mornings. Hiroshi never needed coffee. Each morning, long before the sun settled itself across the tatami floor, he would sit in silence, spine tall, eyes half closed, and pour a small cup of warm water into a white ceramic bowl his wife once made. It wasn't fancy, just a bowl with a faint crack near the rim, a fracture that somehow made it more whole. He called it removing the night. To others, it looked like nothing, but for him, it was the moment the world tilted back into balance. No news, no sound, just warmth moving through coldness, steam rising like a breath he forgot he still had. When he didn't do it, when he rose too quickly or let the kettle go unboiled, his joints would whisper louder, his mind would clench before it stretched. The day would begin, but he would not feel inside it. Later, much later, his grandson told him this habit activated something called the vagus nerve, that it signaled safety, that it softened inflammation. Hiroshi nodded, but in truth, he had never cared for explanations. He only knew this. There are things the body remembers that the mind forgets to ask. And sometimes, what heals us is not what we consume, but what we choose to begin with. Now, in his 93rd year, he still wakes before the sun, still listens to the sound of water rising in the kettle, still holds the bowl with both hands, as if it were something alive. And when he drinks, he closes his eyes, not in prayer, but in gratitude, not for youth, not for strength, but for presence. That's all the body ever wanted, to be greeted before being used. 2. The soft hunger that heals. Naoko never hurried breakfast. Her home sat quietly near the coast, where wind didn't shout. It murmured through reeds, and mornings didn't start. They unfolded. She would open the sliding window just enough to feel the air kiss her cheeks, then wrap herself in a shawl her sister once gave her. And she would wait. Not for hunger, but for the silence between thoughts. Some mornings she would eat. Some she wouldn't. There was no discipline in it, no achievement, only listening. Her neighbors called her odd, an old woman who skipped breakfast like a monk. But Naoko knew her body didn't always want filling. Sometimes it wanted space, space to clean, space to speak, space to be heard from the inside out. It wasn't until years later that her doctor, a gentle man with tired eyes, told her this rhythm had a name. Intermittent fasting, that her cells were likely repairing themselves, quietly sweeping debris. Something called autophagy. Naoko just smiled. She had never needed permission, only stillness. Once, she broke the pattern, joined her grandchildren for toast and milk and laughter. The moment was sweet. But her body ached by noon, bloated, fogged, not from the food, but from forgetting to listen. After that, she returned to her ritual, a bowl of warm barley tea, a seat near the breeze, no rush, no noise. She sometimes thought of her mother, who taught her to kneel before she cooked, not for the gods, but for the grounding. And in that kneeling, Naoko learned early that not all hunger needs feeding, and not all emptiness is a void. Some is room, some is rest. Some is the quiet invitation for the body to tend to itself, not in punishment, but in peace. 3. Harahachi Bu, stopping before. Full Emiko always left a little on her plate, not for manners, not to impress, just because her body said, that's enough. At first, as a young bride in a busy home, she would eat hurriedly, chopsticks clicking against ceramic, rice slipping into broth without pause. But over time, she noticed the after, the tiredness, the tension, the way her stomach would sit like stone through the evening. It was her grandmother who first spoke the words, Harahachi Bu. Eat until you're 80% full. Leave space for the rest of you to breathe. It sounded odd, but when Emiko tried it, something softened. She didn't nap as heavily after lunch. Her knees didn't protest when she rose. Even her dreams became gentler, as if her body had more room to wander. Doctors later explained how this gentle restraint eased blood sugar spikes, reduced oxidative stress, and calmed internal inflammation. But Emiko didn't need science to trust the ritual. She simply saw what happened when she ate with listening instead of longing. Once during a festival, she indulged tempura, noodles, sweet red bean buns. The joy was real, so was the discomfort. Her breath felt shorter, her ankles swollen, her sleep distant. That night, she remembered her grandmother's voice. Better to rise from the table still loving the food than to curse its memory in the night. So she returned to less, not out of shame, but gratitude. A bowl half empty, a body half light, a mind fully there. Now, in her 80s, Emiko still eats slowly, places her chopsticks down halfway through, listens inward, and when she stops, it's not a discipline, it's a decision, not to fill everything, but to trust that what remains is not lack, but grace. 4. The warm bowl that ends the day. Tetsuya never liked sleeping on a full heart, not the emotional kind, but the bodily kind, the kind that left him too stuffed to breathe deep, too jittery to close his eyes without thinking. So he began ending each day with a bowl, just one, always warm, always simple. Some nights it was miso, thick with softened tofu, a sprinkle of seaweed. Other nights, barley porridge, with just a slice of ginger floating like a leaf. The bowl came before the bed, before the brushing of teeth, before the last lamp turned off. It was his way of telling his body, I am here, you are safe, nothing more will be asked of you today. His daughter once laughed. Dad, you eat like a monk. He smiled. Yes, he said, but I sleep like a child. He never tracked blood sugar, never owned a fitness watch. But over time, his doctor noticed things. The steadiness in his pressure, the lack of spikes or crashes, the way he woke not groggy, but grounded. There's a term now, slow carb rhythm, evening glycemic taper. But Tetsuya had no name for it. Only this feeling, a bowl in his palms, steam touching his face, his breath slowing as if the world finally stopped asking questions. And in the silence after the last spoonful, he'd sit, not to digest, but to release. Once, during winter, he skipped the bowl, too tired, too late. That night, he dreamt of rushing, of old hallways, of being chased by shadows he couldn't name. The next morning, he placed a new bowl on the table and whispered, I'm sorry. Since then, he's never missed it, because some bowls are not about feeding hunger. They're about ending the day with something soft, a final kindness, a warm pause, a reminder that peace doesn't come from emptiness, but from how gently we decide to close. 5. A cup that opens morning. Again. Yui didn't drink tea for energy. She drank it to remember she was still here. Each morning, before the sun cleared the trees, she would place a tiny kettle on the stove, not electric, not fast. Just enough heat to let the water speak in tiny hisses. She never timed it. She waited until the kettle sighed. That soft exhale she swore sounded like her mother clearing her throat before a lullaby. Then she poured barley tea in summer, roasted brown rice in winter, ginger on the colder days, each cup chosen not for flavor, but for what it brought back. The scent alone felt like a quilt across her chest, steam rising like incense, warmth seeping into her palms as if her body needed reminding that it was still capable of holding. Yui used to rush mornings, toast, coffee, shoes, noise. But after her husband passed, everything slowed, not by choice, but by ache. And in that ache, she discovered a quieter kind of beginning, one where she didn't have to earn the day, just greet it. Her doctor once noted how her blood pressure had softened, how her cortisol levels seemed kinder. She nodded politely, but inside she knew the tea wasn't medicine. It was a ritual, a way of re-entering the world without bracing for it. Sometimes she would hold the cup a few moments longer, not drinking, just being. The window beside her always cracked open, bird song drifting in, a strand of light finding her lap. And in that moment, she would whisper her own name, just once, not to remind herself, but to say, "I'm still here." Because not all awakenings come from sleep. Some come from returning to yourself gently, cup in hand before the world rushes in. There was a time we called it silly, to warm water before drinking it, to pause before chewing, to let the kettle sing instead of the phone. We laughed at the slow, called it outdated, brushed past the people who waited for their food to cool just so they could taste it fully. In our race toward efficiency, we forgot that some things aren't meant to be improved, only remembered. The small table in our grandmother's home, the bowl that was always cracked in the same place, the way she folded napkins with two hands, even when no one was watching. We thought these moments were decorations. We didn't know they were the architecture. Now, the body creaks where it used to glide. The stomach flinches where it once welcomed. And we wonder why we feel so distant from ourselves. It's not age that aches the most. It's the absence of the small, slow things we once deemed unnecessary. The tea left unfinished. The spoon we licked clean too quickly. The way we swallowed without tasting. Because we had somewhere to be, someone to answer, something louder than our own breath. But those moments were never meaningless. They were anchors. And when we let them go, we drifted. Grief doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet of a morning where nothing feels sacred anymore. Not because life has ended, but because ritual has. And yet, it isn't too late. We can still return. Not to the past, but to the way it felt to be held by time, instead of pushed by it. Sometimes mourning isn't about the people we've lost. It's about the pace we abandoned on our way to becoming efficient, and the tender forgotten truth that maybe we never needed to be fast, just faithful. To the bowl, to the breath, to the soft rhythm we once called life. Maybe the truth is, we never strayed that far. We didn't lose the path. We lost the silence that helped us feel it, like walking through a forest with too much wind. The trail was always beneath our feet. We just couldn't hear it crunch beneath us. All this time, we've blamed age, or luck, or the world moving too fast. But maybe what slipped away wasn't our health, but our permission to pause. The quiet rituals we once thought small. They weren't background. They were language. Every time we chose to sit with food instead of scroll through it. Every time we waited for the tea to cool instead of rushing through the cup. Those weren't delays, they were teachings. We didn't need a program to guide us. We needed silence to notice that the body already speaks. That when our legs tremble, they aren't failing us. They're asking for gentler rhythms. When our stomachs tighten, it's not rebellion. It's a soft plea for peace. And when our breath gets short, it might just be calling us back to where the slowness lives. We've spent decades looking outward for the right food, the right method, the next new thing, but the answer never moved. Only our attention did. Now, in this stillness, with one warm bowl, with one quiet morning, with the hand that pauses before reaching, we feel it again. That knowing, not loud, not certain, but here. We don't need to go back. We don't need to start over. We just need to listen long enough to hear that the path was waiting inside us all along. So much of healing isn't in what we change, but in how we return. Not with plans, not with pressure, just with a softer hand. The spoon still waits in the drawer, the cup still sits by the kettle, the light still comes through the same window, and maybe that's all the invitation we need, to eat slower, to rise slower, to forgive the meals we rushed, the mornings we skipped, the signals we silenced. You were never too late. You were just too surrounded to hear yourself clearly. But now, there's space. And in that space, a single ritual, however small, becomes a doorway to breath, to ease, to presence. You don't have to change everything. You only have to notice what already knows how to care for you. And begin there. If it feels right, we'll walk beside you. Not ahead, not behind, just here, in the quiet. As always,